Okay, the time being 10, I'm going to convene this meeting of the Commission on Worldwide Combined Reporting for the unitary businesses under the business profit tax. We have a draft of the minority report that we received last week from Representative Schomburg advocating in favor of moving to the worldwide combined reporting, and Representative Schomburg, as we knew, will not be here today. And he has told us that he is likely to make revisions to that draft. So I'm sure we'll have an updated version from him when we meet next Monday. I've circulated to the members a draft of the report that goes so far as laying out the process and procedure that we've been through so far, and the testimony in the record reciting what we've heard from those who've come before us. And I thought when I began drafting that it might be more brief, but it turns out you can't be very cursory about these heavily nuanced specific positions. So it is actually a pretty full-bodied synopsis of the actual position of each of our expert witnesses. So we will discuss that. We also have the document prepared by our two members, Kevin Kennedy and Matt Foley, which elaborates on the outline that they put before us last week into more of a narrative. And I know that I'm just seeing that for the first time as we convene. So I think that we should look at the Kennedy-Foley draft section as the basis for the findings segment of our report. And during the coming week, we can flesh out, elaborate on any of the things that are in that and see whether it covered the waterfront. So the progression of the report, we've had a bit of a bumpy start, and that's laid out. We've had a very diverse set of participants and comments, and I believe that is well laid out in the finding in the testimony records section. But we may want to add a little bit more in regards to some of the written submissions we've received. It's very thorough at this moment in terms of everybody who appeared before us. And then I think the findings should be as much as possible statements of fact as we understand them, pros and cons. The report is a very balanced document, I believe, through those sections. Doesn't take a stance. For example, in the synopsis of testimony, there's no commentary from the chair or from the members. It's just trying to, in a very even way, state what their position was. So we'll then need to boil down our findings with recommendations, and those are not yet prepared as of today, but I would say we work on drafting the recommendations during the week. And when we meet next Monday morning, I'd like to conclude the report as much as possible. There might be some I's to dot and T's to cross after we leave next Monday. So you'll be getting the things that I'm talking about early in this week so that it's not a Sunday night, Monday morning surprise. Okay, so we know that Representative Schomburg will not be with us today, and Matt Foley advised he'll be delayed to 10:30. I'd like to take any questions or comments and then suggest perhaps we just recess briefly while we wait for Matt Foley. It'll give us a chance to read what's been put in front of us this morning. Okay, any comments or questions? Okay, the commission is in recess till the call of the chair approximately at 10:30. Okay, thank you. As Mr. Foley has joined us, we have our quorum. This is a official meeting of the Commission on Worldwide Combined Reporting. Drafting in progress up to this date has been is not publicly disseminated, but the drafts as of this date that are being considered by a quorum of the committee are now public documents, and extra copies have been laid out on the table. Before we get into the substance, I just want to observe that Representative Schamberg has prepared minutes for both the October 10th and October 17th meetings. As he's not here, and I see a couple of small revisions I'd like to suggest, we'll wait till we meet next week, at which point we'll look at all of the minutes of the last several meetings, including today's, and we'll adopt minutes anticipating that next Monday is our last meeting. And I'm expecting Mr. Kennedy is going to be unable to attend next Monday.
At this time, I'm unable to.
Okay, but the remaining six, I'm expecting all of us to be here, so we'll have the necessary quorum. And in Representative Schamberg's absence, Representative Ullery has graciously agreed to keep the record of attendance and prepare minutes. So I'm very pleased that I think the pieces are fitting together and we're seeing what this is going to look like. As I said when I opened, and I'm going to repeat this just briefly for Mr. Foley's benefit, the draft that I've prepared goes so far as to lay out the process and procedures and to provide a pretty thorough, granular synopsis of the testimony and record of all of the experts who appeared before us, either in person or via video link. And that includes also the testimony we received a year ago. So I think that section is virtually complete. I think the only addition that I'm considering adding to it is there's been quite a bit of discussion of the ITEP study and the Tax Foundation's rebuttal. And if everybody else agrees, even though they neither appeared in front of us, we have their reports. They've had a focus in our conversations, and I think it would be good to include those in the synopsis of the record. The rest of the things that we have, received links to, studies, things that are online, court cases, et cetera, will not be described in the record section, but we have a very extensive bibliography that Gen 4 has prepared for us, and I think everyone's seen that. So it's anybody who's coming back at this issue at a later date doing research has a very extensive guide of resources. So does everybody agree that it makes sense to include a brief synopsis of the ITEP estimate and the Tax Foundation rebuttal? Okay, I will do that. So I think that that will be an appendix. That will go into the section of testimony and record as additional documents that were carefully reviewed by the commission.
About the full report being added to the report. There's 2 articles in total being added as an addendum.
I see. We could do that. We could have them as attachments. Any objection to that? Okay. Agreed. Let me just make a note of that. All right. So Again, the purpose of the testimony and record is to be fair and balanced, to make an accurate description of what we heard. So please, as you read this more carefully during the coming week, if you think there's anything there that's misstated, mischaracterized, out of balance, let me know that. And we'll do any massaging that we believe is necessary. I think if you're going to send a comment to me, copy the other members, but I don't anticipate a lot of discussion via email, which is not a noticed meeting. Just rather, here's what I've seen, and then let me evaluate it. And if there's questions, we can discuss it next Monday. Again, I know you've only gotten this last evening, or in some cases this morning, and have had fairly scant opportunity to look at it. But is there anything that anybody wants to bring up at this point about the draft on testimony and record? Yes, Mr. Wong.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick observation. On page 5, the first paragraph, the second last line onto the right. So it says even the rate on BPT and then 00. I'm not sure if that was a typo or something like that. I'm not really sure.
That is definitely a typo,
Okay.
and I will read it closely and clean it up.
All right, thank you.
Good catch. Thank you. That's it. Exactly. I need eagle eyes. Any other observations at this point? Right. So please do not hold back during the week. And the earlier in the week you can get me your comments, the better. And I'll try to incorporate things rapidly as I receive them. Okay. So let's move on to the findings and recommendations. I'm going to divide findings and recommendations. So the caption that you see on page 7 of the draft report comes from a template that Gen 4 provided me. This next section will be findings. And I think the findings should be as close as possible to declarative statements of what we all effectively agree to. That doesn't mean that there couldn't be a 6-1 divide of opinion, but it speaks for the commission, in other words. And I think that what Mr. Kennedy and Mr. Foley have put forward is a fantastic foundation for the findings. We can elaborate on it, massage on it a little bit, but that I think is something that we should discuss next. So what you don't, so you take the portion I've drafted, the portion that they have drafted, and that brings us, I think, all the way through a factual summary of everything we've heard and concluded. What that then leaves is the question, is there any analysis and explanation that is more opinion based? And I think there might be a bit of that, but I want to get home, sit down at my computer and think a little bit more about what, if anything, needs explanation to support the commission's ultimate recommendation. And then the recommendation, we will take a position for or against advancing worldwide combined reporting, right? I would just say that, yes.
Do we need to take a position saying that? Or is this, it's a charge to the commission more to analyze and provide options with a determination as to what the balance is? Not recommend worldwide, not oppose worldwide, but just say, this is what's going to happen if you do this, and we don't know what's going to happen if you do that.
Okay, that's an excellent question. And I think that the answer is that is certainly an option. And I think we'll be in a position to decide whether that's the path we want to take next Monday. Here's my thoughts on Representative Ullery's question. It depends what we believe, right? Our charge is to weigh the advantages and the disadvantages. But there will be a minority report that is clearly advocating that the New Hampshire legislature adopt worldwide combined reporting. So the question for the 6 of us is, do we agree with that or do we disagree with that? If we disagree with it, then our recommendation, I think, is likely to come down with a firm statement that we think it is not advisable to go forward. What this commission has not been charged to do, has not taken testimony to do, and is not prepared to do, is to recommend some alternative. So we're not going to end up with a report that says, instead of worldwide combined reporting, let's, adopt Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 as proposed by the OECD or what have you. All right, we're either going to say, yes, we recommend going forward with worldwide combined reporting, or no, we don't. So I think the recommendation has to take a position, at the least, whether it is appropriate at this time for the New Hampshire legislature to move ahead or not. I would also, this is a good moment to ask Mr. Wong. We were having a sidebar conversation before the meeting began. And you have to ask yourself, even if the commission recommended in favor of implementing worldwide combined reporting, do we have a vehicle yet that would implement it adequately? So, for example, HB 121 will come before the Ways and Means Committee within the next 2-3 weeks, and will be decided. It's going to be decided either OTP, ITL, or interim study. So you would have to ask yourself not just whether you think worldwide combined reporting is a good move and appropriate, but also whether HB 121 as drafted actually does what's necessary. And Mr. Wong, could you just elaborate on what you think such a bill would have to include in order to prepare the DRA for implementation?
Right. So, just to reiterate the DRA's position, we are neutral on whether the state takes up legislation to proceed with worldwide combined reporting or to remain as a water's edge filing position. However, it plays out, the DRA would continue to try to implement the New Hampshire's tax laws. In terms of if there is a motion to move ahead with worldwide combined filing reporting, as it is, current laws are written or designed for water's edge filing, and we definitely would need additional guidance or new legislation in terms of redrafting certain parts of the BPT statute to incorporate worldwide filing, because right now most if not all definitions is related to worldwide, water's edge, and then there's the taxation of foreign dividends and that kind of thing. So all that probably will have to be changed, and be considered how best to I guess redraft it, just to re-engineer it for worldwide combined filing purposes.
So how to define a unitary group, for
Yes,
example?
Yeah, exactly. One of those things would be the definition of a unitary.
And undoubtedly others. And I would just comment that if one looks at HB 121, I thought I had it there in front of me, it's probably 80% prefatory language, statements of purpose and intent, a rationale for why it would be, a good bill. When you get to the guts of the implementing portion of the bill, it's then a series of repeals, and then it's one very brief statement that basically says, go implement worldwide combined reporting. So what Mr. Wong is saying is, even if you were in favor of that bill, you would want it elaborated so that the legislature gives guidance
Right.
prior to rulemaking authority
Yes.
to
Implement the World
flush
Wide
it out.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, important point. So, Representative Ulrich, did we come to a balanced conclusion on your question?
Understand what you're trying to do, and I think that's probably fair.
Okay. And, you know, hey, if we find ourselves in a very ambiguous place, then the recommendation might express something that's ambiguous. If we find that we're pretty much in unison and that we believe it is not a good idea for the state to proceed, then I think we should state that unequivocally. Okay. Mr. Foley and Mr. Kennedy, can you walk us through? I've just had a chance to read this. I'm very impressed. I like the structure and the approach. But why don't I turn it over to you and let you lead that discussion?
Oh, he wants a copy. You have to do it from memory.
Matt, I've got them right here. Oh, no, I passed mine off.
I may ask it.
Yes, Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you. Uh, Mr. Chairman, in terms of the comments you just made about what it is we're coming back with, I brought up the House Bill, I think it was 102 from 22, which established this commission.
Yes.
Just to see, was there actually, what the requirements were. I don't know if you have that with you.
Yes.
And it seems to me that the guidance is pretty ambiguous, meaning that just for clarity, it seems to me it just says we just have to report our findings back. It doesn't necessarily say we make recommendations. It doesn't necessarily say, we issue this type of report or that type of report. So I just want to be clear that relative to what we're actually required to do under this bill or law, is simply to report back. And the form of that report or the content presumably is not concrete or set as to what its content needs to be. Would you agree?
I think that's absolutely correct. And to be more specific, 12:2, Roman numeral 3 says we shall study the advantages and disadvantages for the state economy and revenues of replacement of the current water's edge method by the worldwide combined reporting method.
Mm-hmm.
Satisfied that we've done that. And Roman numeral 5 says a final report of its findings and any recommendations for proposed legislation on or before November 1st. So you're correct. It's at the discretion of the commission. It would make a difference if we found that we, had 6 voices in unison and only one dissenting view. Or here, versus whether we may have several people who feel firmly that that there should be a recommendation against, and several who are in a more neutral or nuanced position. We can articulate that if that's the case. I think recommendations can include some indication of how strong the support was.
Right.
So I think we'll have a feel for that next Monday, but not probably today.
Okay. Thank you. Relative to recommendations, and again, I think this is more as we move through this week, potentially there is additional studies that could be done down the road once information is made available to the DRA, assuming the DRA is given direction to study things like international reporting in the guilty and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be something we would want to recommend or entertain or include in the report, or is that just kind of beyond the scope of what this committee is out to do?
Well, we're all free thinkers, and I would encourage free thinking. So please, by all means, as you think about this, earlier in the week is better. Any proposed recommendations that any individual member wants to lob over the side, I think would be very welcomed. And I think that the idea that a recommendation about future study or about an alternative or about something other than just yes or no could be very helpful.
Right.
So if you could fashion a draft recommendation along the lines you're thinking, that would be great.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Foley.
Sure. So just kind of walk through this, I assume, is the intention, Chair? Yeah, and just
Yes.
high level or
Yeah, what I was thinking is you've done a great job of breaking this into into segments. Generally accepted considerations where there is a consensus.
Mhm.
Another section, potential mitigating factors. Excellent. And then further items in support and against, the pros and the cons, which you've separated. What I think you might do is take us one by one through the numbered statement without the narrative that follows it. And let's just stop and pause on each one of them and make sure we agree.
Absolutely, yeah. And so this is just an expansion of the bullet point list that we went through. When was our last meeting? 2 weeks ago?
Mhm.
Every day's blending. Last week? Geez. Yeah, Tuesday. That's right.
Yeah, and thank
We
you
had a
very
tax-
much
We had a
for
tax deadline. I'm feeling it now.
thank you for developing it into a narrative.
Yes. And so these should be familiar. There is obviously more color. So generally accepted considerations. The first one, constitutionally moving to worldwide reporting should be allowed.
Okay, we can just stop there.
Mhm.
The only passage that I've drafted already in the findings is one specifically that reviews the constitutional, and I would simply suggest that we take what I've drafted
Mhm.
and plug it right in there as the narrative that supports that statement.
Mhm.
And I would make one other suggestion. Constitutionally moving to worldwide reporting should be allowed. I just want to change the phrasing so that that doesn't sound should be allowed. Sounds like an endorsement. What I think I'd like to say is moving to worldwide reporting would have no constitutional barriers. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So we're just simply saying there's nothing that bars
Mhm.
action on a constitutional level.
All right.
All right.
The second generally accepted consideration, transfer pricing exists. It's a very simple overview of transfer pricing here. So hopefully that provides some context without going into hundreds of pages of explanations.
I think it's very succinct and well put.
Yep.
George, excuse me, Representative Valerie.
The first question you just answered. The second question I mentioned earlier to Mr. Kennedy, we're using two different terms to discuss the same item. And we need to find either a common terminology or something to describe what we're talking about. You're talking about price transfer. It's really not price transfer, but although that may be the terminology used in the jargon, if you will, within the CPA language. And my friend is going to use transfer of wealth or profit taking or profit hiding or some other type of language that he uses. So I think we need to have a common terminology that's merely the transfer of funds from one entity to another for whatever purpose, whether it's to hide it from taxation legally, or whether it's to help build something else out. I think that distinction needs to be made when we're describing what does take place. So
Okay.
we're not creating the appearance that this is legal tax evasion. which is, that's the second American paragraph.
So we don't want to create a pejorative
Yes.
implication that transfer pricing is somehow inherently bad. I think transfer pricing is in fact a term of art that is used by the tax authorities, by accountants, and universally does describe what we're talking about. And Jordan, if you see other examples, again, whether you bring them up this morning, which would be great, or whether you shoot them out in an email, it would be general wordsmithing for sure. And if you have specific something that gives you reservations, please point it out.
Yeah, and what we've tried, transfer pricing itself is just the terminology used to describe related party transfers and the prices, ascribed there too. So that whether it's abusive or not is a second conversation. That is just the accounting process for related party transfers. And so I understand what you're saying. So what we've tried to do here is, to the extent that there is seem to be an abuse, we've tried to say abuse, right? So we've put abusive transfer pricing, and that's the next bullet, where it creates an uneven playing field. And I would just recommend transfer pricing itself is the terminology and phraseology used globally, for related party transfers and transactions. From there, where we find bad parties, right? Maybe taking legal or unlegal abusive positions, I think we should just classify as such, as that's the risk.
So this is a very good discussion. It illustrates the value of having qualified CPAs on the commission and taking a lead in drafting this portion. There is a difference between the testimony records, where I'm attempting to recount what individual presenters said. And in many cases, they may have said something, in fact, intending, that it's pejorative. But I think in this section of the report, the fact that we're grounded in neutral terminology and the experience of accountants who practice in the area is valuable. This should be a neutral section. Yes,
Chair?
Mr. Kennedy.
If I may, because Mr. Schomburg's not here, I think we're referring to transfer pricing and then abusive transfer pricing. And of course, the abusive transfer pricing is just something that the U.S. government or some government agency would take issue with.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of transfer pricing, we're talking about items that are acceptable or allowable under the law and the taxing rules. However, what worldwide reporting would do would address more the transfer pricing versus the abusive transfer pricing, which is to say that even though it's allowed and legal and provided for under the code and the regulations, that the transfer pricing still has a mechanism with which, rightfully so, funds are transferred to a lower taxing jurisdiction because of the use of patents or trademarks or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
And that the worldwide reporting would essentially remove that function of allowable transfer pricing. And I'm just trying to make sure that there's a distinction that this worldwide reporting is not really looking to look at abusive transfer pricing, but to look at transfer pricing
It
entirely.
effectively neutralizes any intra-affiliate
Right,
transfers
which is
by
currently
pooling
allowed.
them.
Right.
That's a valuable explanation. You might want to jot that down and incorporate it.
Can I get a recording of today's meeting? And I'll just.
We are recorded again, so the answer is yes on the YouTube.
Wonderful.
By the way, for anybody who's not familiar with it, because we're not all legislators, but if you go to the open page of the General Court's website and you scroll all the way to the bottom in the band at the bottom, you'll see House Streaming, Senate Streaming. If you click on House Streaming, it brings up the YouTube channel for the General Court. And that can sometimes be a little obscure, I find, but you have to go up to the top menu and hit home to get the most recent hearings. And this will be viewable as soon as this evening. I I would say further, profit shifting, right? Now we're moving into another term which is suggesting a motive for the transfer pricing. And, I think that there's actually another nugget in what you were just saying, and that is that the proposal of worldwide combined reporting is arguably overbroad relative to its target, which is abusive practices. And interestingly, that's what the whole arm's length guidelines and regulations in the separate accounting is all about. It's about zeroing in on unjustifiable transfer pricing. So it is a weakness in the worldwide combined reporting that it's overbroad. Okay. Back to Mr. Foley. Oh, Representative Valerie, thank you.
Yeah, that brings up 2 points. I really do like the last phraseology, that with the end discussion and explanation. That was concise. I just remind the people that are going to use this. Some of them have little to no economic knowledge. I mean, as far as having taken any serious economic courses, they do have economic knowledge from whatever background they are, with the exception of Dr. Holme, who's got quite a bit of it. But when we talk about one phrase, and Mr. Chair, Terry, you just brought it out. There's three differences there. One is profit taking, one is abusive transfer pricing, and one is necessary transfer pricing for the operation of the business. And I've mentioned this several times during the discussion. You have a large corporation and it needs extra money over here. That's not abusive. That's just taking money from where, because money is fungible, moving it from point A to point B. I think that needs to be clear in that there are two different types of transfer pricing. And on the general side of the discussion, rather than using a bunch of different language, we need to use the same phrase so that we know that we're talking about the same action on both the neutral side, the legislative side, and the opposition side. And that I think Tom ought to, Representative Schomburg ought to be made aware that that's the goal is to use the same language everywhere. So that when he's talking about something, he uses the same language that we're talking about it, so we don't wind up with different words saying the same thing.
Okay, these are very valid points. I think to see what you are saying through into the draft will require some specific edit suggestions. I think we're all mindful of this, but by all means, if you catch some of these things that you think are, it's a valuable comment. One of the things that I want to be mindful of is that Representative Schomburg has made it clear he is going to file a minority report recommending worldwide combined reporting. I've read his draft, and I don't want to tamper with it. I think it's his expression of what he believes. Fact is, it's very passionate, and there are things that he says that I don't personally believe can be backed up, or maybe are a bit overstated or a bit argumentative or a bit shrill. But I don't know that I want to, we could suggest to him how he might temper something, but it's his document.
Okay. And so the third one, third bullet here, and I do think it's attempting to address your concerns, Representative Ulrich, is transfer pricing exists, and maybe we can emphasize the point that it's a necessary business, multinational. It's a requirement. It's not good, bad, or indifferent. It's a requirement in an integrated vertical business. So there's no choice.
An analogy occurred to me during this past week, and that is franchises.
Correct.
So a franchise is very much of an arm's length relationship. You have a corporate parent and you have a franchisee who has qualified and made an investment and entered into a contractual relationship. If I own 14 subways and I'm dealing with the parent corporation, there will be a whole set of understandings about how much I have to contribute for marketing, how much I have to contribute for brand recognition, how much I have to contribute for all kinds of things. These are examples of how you wouldn't necessarily call that an affiliate. But in a franchise arm's length relationship, you have the very same kinds of transfers. It's just customary business practice to share investments made on behalf of your cooperating partners.
And so that is the second bullet, just kind of acknowledging it exists. And again, maybe we can emphasize that it's a requirement, it's a need, it's not an option. And the third one is to acknowledge the fact that there is, we say perceived because, who are we to, full-heartedly opine, abusive transfer pricing practices out there that result in, truly trying to take advantage of kind of misalignments in the tax code, right? It's been the old play where you can shift profits to low tax or no tax jurisdictions. And then also kind of acknowledging the efforts to curb that activity. All right, so that's what the third part takes address of. And we do also kind of prelude into the fourth part, which is the state, and I can pause after this, but does tax foreign income already generated by businesses subject to the business profits tax. These would be multinationals with foreign subsidiary investments in foreign subsidiaries. So this is not your foreign entity with U.S. subsidiaries, just to highlight that fact. I know that is a distinction we're going to make in the wider report. But it does talk through kind of the two instances when foreign dividends are received or when these deemed foreign dividend rules arise from a U.S. federal tax perspective and included in the tax base. All right, so that's number
Yep,
4.
I thought that was excellent.
And then number 5, just, one of the things we were assigned with here is the revenue impact of the change. That's one of the things we were charged with studying. And as we all know and appreciate, it's unknown, good, bad, indifferent. And just kind of highlighted the 3 points, which are all the points, but the 3 points on making that determination: the current tax of foreign income, the expansion in the tax base, which would be unknowable probably, and then the impact on the apportionment factor, which would impact that. All right.
I think the DRA would fully stand behind that statement that it's impossible to estimate.
That is correct. We currently do not collect all the worldwide information to make an estimate of what it would be if we would be switching to worldwide. And I think that's probably consistent with the other state reports or state studies done by, or the studies done by the other states when they're contemplating a worldwide combined filing.
That's an interesting observation. I would concur with that. I hadn't thought about it previously, but in reading the studies and what I've seen of Indiana, Minnesota, Maine, and Rhode Island, 4 states that have recently considered this and within the last half dozen years, they may have had submissions like we have had making estimates, but in none of those reports was there an estimate.
That is
And I
correct.
think that the state officials behind those reports concluded that they were that there was no methodology and no data that would support an estimate.
Right. Like I think the latest report was from Maine, and the Maine revenue, I think they were charged with performing a study, and they were, according to the report that I read, they were not able to come up with definitive numbers for estimation. And I think that would be consistent with New Hampshire as well, because we just don't have the data to make that estimation. And then I guess similarly with I think it was Minnesota, that was mentioned in the Tax Foundation report, where they actually adopted or modified numbers from the ITAP report versus having their own study, I suppose, their own analysis or calculations. Yeah.
Good, thank you.
We shift from there. I don't know if there was any, and I know Kevin, you went through those were it for generally accepted considerations. I don't know if there's a desire to add any more.
Well, I think we should all think about that as we digest this during the week. But
Right.
I was very impressed with that choice of 5 elements to hit. And I think I'm going to have to be in the weeds again before I can even think whether there's another.
And then so for mitigating factors, the one thing we wanted to acknowledge, well, the two things. One is the U.S. federal tax landscape, and how it has disincentivized to some extent the potential abusive profit shifting just with a lower federal tax rate, a more encompassing anti-deferral provision, GILTI, everyone's favorite. I'm sure you guys are talking about it at home at this point. And then also the fact that the OECD BEPS project, which has been going on for 10 years now, does continue. And again, it is targeting abusive transfer pricing schemes, amongst other things. And so that's really the key mitigating factors, as the focus of this is abusive transfer pricing, and outbounding of profits. Those are the ones we identified. We thought of going much further on this, but we didn't want to overwhelm on mitigating factors either.
Do you think that any of the tax developments within the state of New Hampshire itself would also constitute mitigating factors? Let's say developments since 1986.
I don't know what you think, Kevin. I mean, single sales would be that's a local, right? So it's not going to help outside. I guess I'd have to think about it as a mitigating factor.
Locally, I mean, other than, of course, and it's referenced later on, the taking the GILTI income and applying it to New Hampshire taxation, which isn't really a mitigating factor in this report. It's really the fact that it's one of the arguments against is that New Hampshire already taxes it. So we didn't really put it in so much as a mitigating factor. Other than that, I can't think of anything offhand.
I think that distinction makes good sense.
Yeah.
You are addressing New Hampshire's use of GILTI in a different context.
In a different
in the context of the
Yes.
fact that we are generating tax revenue.
Right, not as so much as a mitigating factor. Is that there's already some taxation of foreign income by
So
application
here,
of
what
GILTI.
you're basically getting at when you say mitigating measures is mitigating the temptation or desirability to use transfer pricing in an abusive way.
Yeah,
You might
mitigating
want to elaborate that slightly.
mitigating transfer pricing in general, not necessarily for New Hampshire, but transfer because
So let's tease that out. All right. So your point here is that this segment is mitigating the temptation for undesirable behavior on the tax filer, whereas there's a different mitigation going on in the other group, and that is mitigating the impact on the state of New Hampshire's tax revenue.
Right. So for New Hampshire to apply GILTI income probably does not mitigate someone's desire for transfer pricing activity. However, the other items, the fact that the corporate rate is lower, that these other things were put into place to tax foreign income, means that companies are less encouraged to do that because there are these other mitigating factors that says, well, we've already been taxed on our dividends, so we can bring that back into the US because it's already been taxed, it's not going to get taxed again. They're already taxing us on GILTI, so we can bring these things in. And those things, though I'm not sure there's any evidence to show this, in theory, would reduce the desire for companies to have these perceived abusive transfer pricing items. The fact that New Hampshire has GILTI probably doesn't have any sort of influence in that regard.
So it's a valid, I think a very significant distinction. Let's just make sure our captions make that distinction. So treating them separately is the right thing to do, and why?
And then we go into the for and against discussion, and in the for, and perhaps we should shoot a note to Representative Schomburg too, just to see if he would have feedback here to expand on it, right? I think that's only fair, and what we should do is, if I understand his position, it would eliminate any perceived advantage received by multinational businesses due to their transfer pricing policies with foreign related parties, right? So they have the ability, the availability to undertake transfer pricing. As I've said before, they have a requirement to undertake transfer pricing. However, it could be abusive or perceived abusive, and as a result, that would be mitigated through the proposal. So I will shoot him a note later today or tomorrow just to make sure that at a minimum he reads that paragraph, so that if he would like to bolster it in the neutral, or
Right.
at least provide feedback.
Now, I've only seen this in paper on arrival, but did you say it's already been circulated
Yeah, I sent an email. Hopefully it came through.
This morning.
this
Yeah,
morning? Good.
yeah.
So Representative Schomburg does have it.
Correct.
And I would anticipate it's very likely he'll sit and watch the video of this meeting
Okay,
as well.
good. Well, respond. Against, these were the ones that we had identified here. Again, change as needed, enhance. State's removal of the worldwide combined method in 1986 ensured that businesses with a New Hampshire tax presence were treated equally. This kind of pulls on the thread that you had emphasized, Chairman, in last week's meeting. I trust your position will expand on that.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting thing. This is not effectively, the proposal is not a return to what happened in 81 to 86. That by itself doesn't make it either good or bad. But in 81 to 86, the uneven enforcement created exactly the kind of inequity that, for example, Mr. Garr highlighted. And the move to Water's Edge was an effort to end that kind of discrimination between U.S.-based multinationals and foreign-based. So it's then interesting to see that even the Water's Edge, in some people's minds, may be fundamentally flawed because it's inequitable. We'll address that.
All right. The second one I think is one that we're all conscious of, but New Hampshire would be an outlier in that the only true mandatory worldwide is for oil and gas producers in Alaska. Every other state is elective. Third, potential decrease in foreign direct investment in New Hampshire business community. Emphasis on potential. No one would know whether that would occur, but that has been highlighted and communicated to us. Notable increase in administrative and compliance burden on businesses, tax practitioners, and New Hampshire Department of Revenue. A quick summation of some of the challenges that those three parties would face on this move. And the fifth one, again, reemphasizing the revenue impact, good or bad, of a move to worldwide combined reporting on the state.
Okay, and I think that's a good succinct list of the 5 primary reasons. As I think about it more during the week, I might want to flesh a couple of those out a little further.
Yes. Makes sense.
Okay. Um, I just want to thank you both again. I think this is a very, very valuable structure and approach for organizing the information in a neutral fashion. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, so we have mostly it's not a finished product, but we have in front of us the narrative of the testimony and the narrative of the generally accepted considerations, the potential mitigating factors, the pros and the cons. How much analysis or explanation do we think this report needs to have before it leaps to a recommendation? I have a feeling that even for myself in answering my own question, I practically have to sit at a computer and see what flows off the fingers as I try to make sure that, you know, we've really addressed everything that we need to. So, but the answer to my question may also depend on whether you've come down with a firm conclusion or whether you're in a more equivocal stance. Anybody want to? How much analysis before we just leap to a recommendation? Or does this pretty much lay it out?
Mr. Chairman, I can speak for myself. I mean, I'm on a very firm conclusion. I know where I stand on the issue. And I have to say that I've served on several of these over my years in the legislature. This has been the most thoroughly um, talked about, hammered out, batted around proposal I've ever, or consideration I've ever had a privilege to sit upon. You've done a very thorough job of looking at the issue. But I know where I stand, and I think we have a consensus. So.
Okay, thank you. Others?
I think the answer to that question is just it depends on if you're stepping in as an outside reader, and would all the content of the report support the recommendations that's being laid out. And if the answer is yes, then I don't think there's any need for any additional analysis or any to be incorporated into the report. But if you think that once you're reading it as an outside reader, that say, okay, yeah, it's somehow the findings or the presentations of the context somehow just doesn't connect with the recommendation, then maybe some links, some bridges might need to be built in that sense. I mean, it's probably a bit challenging for us because we've been in this commission, and so we've seen it all internally. I would think I think we have enough. I do think so, but I think if maybe a neutral party, if they would read it, I'm not sure. They might also have the same conclusion, but it's just something that I'm bringing up to your attention. That's all.
Okay, thank you. And staying neutral consistently can be challenging. Any other thoughts? Mr. Kennedy?
So, I think again, largely staying neutral, and neutral being that conceptually I understand the idea of the transfer pricing issue and Mr. Schomburg's position that there's this perceived idea of an unlevel playing field. And I don't think anybody really wants to would want to leave thinking, yes, we've agreed there's an unlevel playing field, but we're going to leave it as it is anyway. I think that the information provided simply is insufficient to determine that that actually exists. And because of that, going along with that and considering the complications to move to an alternative method, to move to worldwide reporting, that there just isn't enough available to us relative to making a change of this magnitude. And that if the desire is to potentially move to worldwide reporting and to level the playing field because it's perceived that it exists, that steps would need to be taken in order to better quantify, well, what is the unlevel, does an unlevel playing field exist? And I don't think that that information is available. And I think the DRA or something would need to be done to collect information to determine, well, how do we quantify that? Which would certainly be, I imagine, a significant burden on the DRA as well. But I think without enough information, the burden of moving to a change, it just isn't supported.
I agree with you. And you don't have to become an advocate for a different alternative to get to the point of concluding that this particular approach is not a good idea. Unwise on balance, you know. Mr. Foley, you want to add anything?
Not not a ton. I think your question is how expansive does the report have to be at its core? And I guess having not read many of these in my life, we've had a 90-pager that's been provided to us and a 7-pager, I think, right? And kind of, I know which one I opted for. And so I somewhat defer to you as primary drafter of this on what level of context. It's all there. How much color do you want to provide to help someone get to it is really the question. I think the core stuff we framed, there is an impassioned minority report that does have to be acknowledged in some sense, right? So, but yeah, I don't know beyond that.
Okay, that's very good. As I said, I don't suggest in any way that we tamper with or put pressure on the minority report. I'll have another comment about that in a moment. Representative Villery, is there anything that you want to add?
No, and keeping the minority report, that is the sole authorship of Representative Schomburg is a good idea. He does have strongly held, and I can understand where they're coming from. I disagree with them, but I understand where they're coming from and what he's attempting to do. I just don't think this is the vehicle to do it.
Okay, very fair. So, with that in mind, because we do have an articulated, passionate minority report, there's at least a temptation to want to have a full-throated rebuttal. I think we should resist that temptation. But what I'm thinking is this. I think that the final recommendation should be very succinctly stated. So I'm going to draft a brief interlude that I'll call majority analysis, just to summarize what the key points are driving us to disagree that worldwide combined reporting should be implemented by the state of New Hampshire at this time. That might include there's insufficient evidence. It's too radical a change. It creates administrative burdens both for the filer and for the tax administration. Brief. But just to pull together that these are the conclusions of the majority and take it beyond what was, I think, quite well done and deliberately a neutral set of statements in the findings. Okay? So not argumentative, not a rebuttal, but a succinct statement of why we disagree in going forward. I'll hold till next Monday to ask whether everybody is comfortable signing on to that report. I would hope that all 6 of us would be in a position to sign on to it, but you'll speak next Monday. And I'd rather have a draft in front of you that you can subtract from than to not have a draft. Okay? Good. Anything further that advances the mission this morning? All right. Well, thank you very much. And again, thank you, drafters. That was excellent. You've done something I wasn't prepared to do in that degree at all. Okay. That concludes the meeting, and the commission is adjourned.